Good evening. Last time I was here, we looked at one of Jesus' parables. It was from Luke chapter 15. Tonight we're going to look at a parable of Jesus in the very next chapter, Luke chapter 16. And this parable about the wealthy man and his steward is often seen as one of the most difficult parables of Jesus. I've known that in the past, that it's been viewed that way, because I was thinking about that again this week. I was hesitant. Do people really think this is the most difficult parable? And so I Googled the most difficult parable of Jesus. And the top 3 entries under that were this parable. I don't think it's really all that difficult. It does throw you a little curveball at first, but if you follow through, I think Jesus explains the parable well enough. Like all of Jesus' parables, this one holds really good practical meaning for us. We can make some good application from the things that Jesus says. So let's turn to Luke chapter 16. Read about this parable, this story of a wealthy man and his steward. Luke chapter 16, beginning in verse 1. Now he was also saying to the disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward. A steward, of course, you know, is a man, we might call him an accounts manager today. He was in charge of handling certain funds that belonged to this rich man and investments that belonged to this rich man. There was a certain rich man who had a steward, and this steward was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, "What is this that I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward." The steward said to himself, "What shall I do, since my master is taking the stewardship away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg." He doesn't know what he's going to do next. As we see in the next few verses, he doesn't know where he's going to live next, because apparently his not only his income, but his place of living was provided by this wealthy man. So now he fears for how he's going to make a living and where he's going to live. And so what he does, as you probably know, and as we'll read in these verses, is people who owe this wealthy man money, this stewardship goes around and discounts how much they should pay him. He lets them off the hook. He cuts their debt, and they never then, apparently, fully pay the debt that they owe to this rich man. But this steward has made friends of those who owe this rich man. So far, that's just a story. The difficult part comes in verses 8 and 9. And his master praised the unrighteous steward because he had acted shrewdly. And then Jesus' comment on this, "For the sons of this age are more shrewd and relative to their own kind than the sons of light." Jesus says that this steward, and a lot of other people like him in the world, are shrewd and clever in their financial dealings, and the sons of light aren't. The implication is that they should be thinking clearly about how to use money. Further in verse 9, and this is again Jesus' comment about this master, this wealthy man. And his master praised the unrighteous steward because he had acted shrewdly, for the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. So Jesus compliments this steward for his shrewdness, for being clever. And he tells us to make friends by means of The mammon of unrighteousness. What is the mammon of unrighteousness? Well, it's money. Money that, elsewhere we read money is the love of money is the root of all evil. And that statement highlights how money is often used unrighteously and for unrighteous purposes. But Jesus here, referring to it as the mammon of unrighteousness, because of how it's often used, he tells us, make friends of yourselves by the means of this mammon of unrighteousness. Why? So that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. Okay, before we say much more about this, we've commented that a lot of people kind of struggle with this parable and are confused by what Jesus is saying. What do we make of this? What's the lesson here? The lesson is clearly in verse 9, but what is it exactly? What is Jesus wanting to learn? I think this parable is actually pretty easy. And before we get into that, I want to describe a problem among some believers, some who claim to be Christians and faithful to Christ. And the problem that Jesus is addressing, we see in those people. And then I think the meaning of this parable may become more clear. Some believers have a disconnect between their faith in the Lord and how they used the money or wealth that they have, whether that wealth is a lot or a little. They have this disconnect between their faith and how they use money. They believe in God, they believe in Jesus, they serve Him in so many ways, but they view their money as for themselves. We need to be wiser than that, or in the words of this passage, we need to be more shrewd than that. We need to see our money as a tool for righteousness rather than just for ourselves. That will be truly protecting our wealth and the goals, not so much our wealth, but the goals we have in mind for ourselves. But instead, we just protect the wealth for ourselves. We look at all our material gain, we see it as for ourselves, and that's not very shrewd, that's not very wise, that's not very clever, and it doesn't protect our ultimate goal of being accepted into an eternal home. Remember, this steward was looking to be accepted into some home somewhere, and he uses money in a way that wins him acceptance into a home somewhere. Jesus is saying we need to look at our money in view of what's going to get us accepted into an eternal home. In other words, he's just saying, use your money the way God would want you to, so that He'll approve of you and allow you into His home. So Jesus tells this parable about this secular man. He's not particularly a spiritual man, it seems. But he's just a secular man, a steward, who realizes his future is in jeopardy. He's losing his job. He's losing his place to live. He doesn't want to dig ditches. He doesn't want to do that hard labor. He says he's not good for that kind of work. And so he doesn't know what he's going to do. And so Jesus creates this as a parable to teach us about the importance of using money in view of what we really want in the end. A home. An eternal home. So let's go back and read through these verses a little more completely. We've read the first 3 verses. The steward's in trouble because he has squandered the possessions of the wealthy man. Things have been sold to other people, but the steward has not collected the money and brought it back to the wealthy man, brought it back to his master. He's just kind of let those things slip. The master finds out about it, and he fires him on the spot. So he's now unemployed and will be homeless. So we've read those first 3 verses. Let's read following that, verse 4. It says, I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from my stewardship, they will receive me into their homes. Who's the they? Well, that becomes clear in the next few verses as to who's the they that will receive him into their homes. In verse 5, and he summoned each one of his master's debtors, and he began saying to the first, how much do you owe my master? The steward doesn't even know how much he had neglected to collect. So he's having to ask, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Now, he owed 100. This person did. But the steward says, just write down 50. Write down 50, we'll consider it closed. And he's going to take that 50 back to his master. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. So this guy's not getting as good a discount as the first guy, but he's getting a discount. Sure, I'll write 80 and I'll be done with this, and I'll have gotten away with paying less than I had planned to pay in the first place. So he pays the 80 instead of 100. And his master praised the unrighteous steward because he had acted shrewdly. This master is not praising the steward because the steward discounted how much those people owed the master. He's praising the shrewdness of the steward because the steward has now ingratiated himself to these other men who owe the master. He's done a favor to them so that they'll look kindly on the steward and maybe take him into their homes. That's this man's plan. I'm going to cut the debt of these people who owe my master. They'll like me. They'll appreciate me. And they'll accept me into their homes. That's what he's worried about the whole time. What am I going to do for a living? Where am I going to live? And so what we see here is a recognition that this steward realized that how he used money could please someone. How he used money could please someone, and that someone might then welcome him into their homes, since he's not going to be at the home of this wealthy man anymore. That's the point Jesus is trying to get us to see there. And Jesus' comment at the end of verse 8, the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. Now, the way the world uses money is not righteous. The way this man was using money was not righteous. Jesus is not praising that aspect of what he did. He's praising this man for realizing what to do to be taken into a home somewhere. That he understands how I use money can affect my future. And so Jesus then tells us in verse 9, I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when it fails, when money fails, when is money going to fail? Well, every time we hit a recession, we might think, oh, money has failed. But not yet. It hasn't failed. You know, money still works, just not quite as well as we would like it to sometimes. But when money ultimately fails, well, that's going to be the end of the world. That's going to be the final day, the day of judgment. That's when money will stop working. So, reading this verse again, verse 9, I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when money fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. Now it says they will receive you into eternal dwellings, and we might wonder about that, because who is going to receive anyone into an eternal dwelling? Well, that's the Lord. The Lord is going to receive people into eternal dwellings. And yet this says they may receive you into eternal dwellings. Well, I suppose you can interpret that as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, that's the they. But I think this is a simple case of when you're talking about someone and you haven't exactly named them, we often use the plural they instead of the singular he. For example, the saying, if you give a guy an inch, now let me say it differently. If you give someone an inch, they'll take a mile. Now I've changed someone into they. If you give someone an inch, they'll take a mile. We do that in English, and they did that in Greek, often switching to the plural when you haven't specifically named it to someone. If you specifically say, if you give John an inch, then you're going to say, he'll take a mile. But if you don't name the person, if you just say someone, if you give someone an inch, they'll take a mile. We do that. The Greeks did that. They changed it to the plural they. And so here when he says, they may receive you into eternal dwellings, I don't think he's talking necessarily about a plurality of people. But the one who receives anyone into eternal dwellings will receive us into that eternal dwelling if we will make God our friend by how we use money in this world. Even though that money is often used in evil ways, the mammon of unrighteousness, still it's important how we use money as opposed to the way the world uses money. And so with that, I think we can understand verse 9. I say to you, make friends for yourselves, God. Make God your friend by the means of the mammon of unrighteousness, by how we use our money, so that when money fails, God will receive you into eternal dwellings. Now let me see. I've gone a bit here without my notes. I need to find where I am. Okay, so Jesus has commented in verse 8 that people in the world understand that. Not necessarily about God, but people in the world understand how I use my money affects my future. And he says that Christians, sons of light, often don't understand that how we use our money affects whether we'll be received into some dwelling someday, an eternal dwelling someday. The world understands your future depends on how you use your money. Sons of light sometimes don't understand that how we use our money affects whether we'll be welcomed into a dwelling, an eternal dwelling. That's important for us to think about. Jesus is admonishing his audience to gain his friendship, the Lord's friendship, by how we use our money so that he'll receive us into eternal dwelling. Now I said, in that sentence just there, I said, how we use our money. And that's part of the problem. We view it all as our money. And in a sense it is. God has blessed us with whatever we have. It's ours. Nobody else has the right to come along and take it from you because it's yours. But is it really ours? Our bodies, are our bodies really just ours? We can do anything we want with it? No. It belongs to the Lord. Our lives, is it just ours? Or do our lives belong to the Lord? Yeah. Our lives belong to the Lord. Does our money really belong to us? Or does it belong to the Lord and it's kind of on loan to us while we live here? Remember James chapter 1, verse 17, where James points out to us in that verse 17, every good thing bestowed and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. All the good things we have, whatever wealth we have, is a blessing from the Lord. We think of the parable of the talents, where those three individuals are given differing amounts of talents, and they are responsible to the one who gave them those talents to use them in a good way. It's not really theirs. And our money is not really ultimately ours. It's his. And we need to use our money with that in view. And that's what Jesus is praising this unrighteous steward for, is he understood that how he uses his money is going to affect his future, whether he has a home to live in or not. An unrighteous steward used money in an unrighteous way, cutting the debts of those people so that he could be friends with them, even though his master didn't get what was really owed to him. So he's not being praised for the unrighteousness of his action. He's being complimented because he understood how to use money will affect my future and give me a place to dwell. We need to understand that same thing, that how we use money affects whether we'll be given a place to stay in the future. Jesus' comment in verse 9, or verse 8, is that the sons of light often don't understand that. We need to understand that. So applying this, as we think about how we use our money in ways that would make the Lord happy with us, in ways that make the Lord our friend, in ways that to which the Lord would respond by giving us a home, an eternal home with him in heaven, it has a lot to do with many aspects of our lives and how we use money in many aspects of our lives. It's more than just our Sunday contribution. You know, make a contribution on Sunday and, okay, that's good. I'm pleased with the Lord in regard to how I use our money. Well, that is one aspect of it. How we participate in the work of a congregation and contributing to that effort. But it's a lot more than just our Sunday contribution that comes into play here. In fact, most passages in the New Testament that talk about giving, most passages in the New Testament that talk about the need to be generous with what we have are not talking about the Sunday contribution. They're talking about just generally in life how generous we are, how giving we are. For example, I'll give you just one example of that. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 10, Paul is talking to us individuals about choices we make. It says in verse 10, "So then while we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, especially to those who are of the household of faith." So with what we have, we need to do good to everybody. He says especially to other Christians. But, you know, this is talking about an aspect of our lives outside the Sunday contribution of just being good to those around us with what we have. That's one example, but, you know, if you make a list of all the passages in the New Testament that talk about giving and generosity, most of them are more like this and less about the Sunday contribution. So, what I conclude from that is when we think about, am I using my money well? Do I have a giving spirit like the Lord wants me to? We come up short in answering that question. We come up short if we say, yeah, I give every Sunday. God wants us to be giving and generous throughout our lives, many aspects of our lives. So that's one thing to think about in terms of how do we apply this principle of using money to make the Lord our friend so that he'll accept us into an eternal dwelling. Another thought for us to think about is, you know, we live in a wealthy country. Whether we individually are, you know, at the average wealth in this country or whether we're below average in wealth in this country, or maybe we're a little above average in wealth in this, wherever we fall on that, it is so easy for us to view a certain standard of living, whether it's down here or in the middle or up high, wherever it is. We find it very easy to reach for some certain standard of living and think, I deserve that. I'm going to do everything to reach that. And once we reach it, to hang on to it and not fall below that standard of living. We hold fast to that. And often, our standard of living includes some quite nice things. When, even if it's less than average in our society, it's more than people in other societies have. And yet we cling to it like, well, I deserve that. I should have that. And if giving to people around me, if being generous to people around me means that I'm going to have to step down from the standard of living I've seen for myself, well, I don't want to do that. Am I being stingy? No, I give every Sunday. But the Lord wants us to be generous in giving in all aspects of our lives. And sometimes that will mean, taking a step down the economic ladder and saying, oh, well, I guess for a while here, I may need to be satisfied with less than I've seen for myself. But that's what it means to use money and have an attitude toward money that will make Jesus our friend so that he'll receive us into an eternal dwelling. The danger, as we see back in the times of the prophets of the Old Testament, the danger is so well illustrated in, for example, a passage like Amos chapter 6, where the people were so wrapped up in the possessions that they had, the standard of living they had achieved, the wealth that they had accumulated, and the things they enjoyed, and they did not sacrifice any of it for spiritual purposes. Amos chapter 6, verse 1. Woe to those who are at ease in Zion, and to those who feel secure in the mountain of Samaria, the distinguished men of the foremost of nations. So the Lord pronounces a woe upon these people. We get a little more description of their wealth in verses 4 and following. Those who recline on beds of ivory and sprawl on their couches and eat lambs from the flock and calves from the midst of the stall, who improvise to the sound of the harp, and like David have composed songs for themselves, who drink wine from sacrificial bowls, while they anoint themselves with the finest of oils, yet they have not grieved over the ruin of Joseph. Their concern for spiritual things wasn't there. They used money as if it was completely theirs, and it didn't matter to the Lord how they used it. And the Lord is saying in this passage, it does concern him how they used their money. And it was all about themselves and satisfying themselves. And so they're in danger of the Lord's judgment there in Amos chapter 6. And they certainly had not learned the message that Jesus is teaching back in Luke chapter 16, where we were a moment ago with this parable. They had not learned that how they use money affects their future, affects whether they're going to be welcomed into a home with the Lord. We need to learn that lesson. That steward is outdoing us sometimes in terms of understanding that how he uses money affects whether he'll have a place to live or not. Well, back to well, actually, before we go back to Luke chapter 16, let's go to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. How we use money, how we think of money, affects whether we have a future home or not. And if our treasure is here on me having these things and me enjoying these things and me keeping this standard of living or even going up to a higher standard of living, if all of that is more important to us than spiritual things, then, well, that's where our treasure is going to be, here. Our treasure is going to be here where we placed it. We need to place our treasure in heaven, and then that's where our heart will be. Yes, we have needs, and we need to use our money to satisfy those needs, and the Bible teaches that. We also, most of us, enjoy a number of comforts and some degree of wealth, and we enjoy those things. But it's good for us to think about how much of my attitude toward my money is about me enjoying the things that I want to enjoy versus how much are we laying up for heaven. That's the thing Jesus is trying to get us to think about in Luke chapter 16. We need to ask, is that steward outdoing us in terms of understanding that how he uses money can affect his future and mean the difference between being given a place to dwell and not being given a place to dwell. So we'll read the next few verses in this passage, and then we'll close. Verse 10, Luke chapter 16, verse 10. He who is faithful in a very little thing is also faithful in much, and he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much. If therefore you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous mammon, yes, money is filthy because of how people use it, but we need to be faithful in terms of how we use it. If therefore you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous mammon, who will entrust the true riches to you? And if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? The money that we enjoy now is really another's. It belongs to the Lord, and he has expectations of how we use it. And if we've not been faithful in the use of that, who will entrust the true riches to us? If we haven't been faithful, verse 12, in the money that really belongs to God, not us, who's going to give us that which is your own, a place to dwell in heaven with him? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. I started out, well, near the beginning of the lesson, talking about the mistake that some of us make, that, we believe in the Lord, but we have this disconnect between that and how we think of money and how we use money. The reason for that disconnect is because you can't serve two masters. I'm going to serve God, and I'm going to use all my money and wealth for me. That doesn't work. You can't successfully serve two masters. You have to choose one. Choose money in this world, or choose the Lord. And that's what we need to choose, because we cannot successfully serve both. So, that's our lesson for this evening. I think that's a good explanation of this parable that is often viewed so difficult, as being so difficult, but it also reminds us that the message of the parable, which is use the mammon of unrighteousness, use this world's money in ways that please the Lord, rather than just pleasing ourselves. In a moment, we're going to stand up and sing number 635, I Am Coming to the Cross. The third verse of that song, here I give my all to thee, friends and time and earthly store. Soul and body thine to be, wholly thine forevermore. Let's see this parable for the message that it has. to use the money of this world, mammon of unrighteousness, in good ways, in spiritually focused ways. Yeah, pay your bills. Heat your home. That costs money. You need to do that, though. Buy the food that you need. And if the Lord has blessed you with an abundance and you're able to do more than those things, then good, enjoy that. But realize that it's the Lord's money, and He wants you to do good with it. Be generous with people around you, as well as with the congregation you participate with. All right, if you have some need this evening, we have this opportunity. Would you come as we stand and sing our song of invitation?